It's interesting going to universities, partially because it makes you feel how old you are. Hugh, Dennis and I were at college together, and obviously while we were there we did a lot of comedy to student audiences. We then left and we realised that you lose touch with student audiences so quickly because the generations renew themselves every 3 years. Weirdly, what we found was that when we reached about 30, we got to the point where it was fine to do university gigs again because the students had no expectation that you would be in their world. I mean, this particular show is, although obviously it's recorded in universities, it's not aimed at any age group or particularly. Hopefully it's just a funny quiz. In this particular series, we went to Surrey, Guildford, then we went to Birmingham, Aston, then we've been to Leicester and Essex University, which I've not seen before. Yeah, and Cardiff University, where we did the pilot for this. But we try and get a geographical spread. There's a bit of a myth about the Footlights that it's a sort of golden key to professional comedy, but it isn't really. The only thing it gives you is experience. So when we came out of university, we had a certain amount of experience from going to Edinburgh and doing student shows. But as I said, student shows are to student audiences. And the moment you leave, you're suddenly performing to people, A, who might be older than you, and B, they've got mortgages or they've got jobs, and so you suddenly have to widen the scope of what you're doing. So actually, university, in retrospect, is wherever you are is an incredibly valuable time where you can not worry about things like that. As soon as we left, we very quickly realised that all the material we'd amassed to students was not suitable to the kind of venues that we would then be doing. Firstly, because they were very stand-up comedy orientated, and secondly because some of the material just wasn't, it was a bit studenty. So we spent about 6 months when we left just writing material with a view of widening the scope of what we did, and then we started doing gigs basically. And the great thing about comedy, and what I think distinguishes comedy from every other performance medium, is that it's really open access. If you want to act or you want to write, there's a whole system there. You have to audition for things, you have to find publishers or get work commissioned. In comedy, you can literally look through your local listings magazine, find the venues, phone them up and book an open spot, which is what we did in a lot of places. We were just phoning up pubs who had a comedy night once a week and booking open spots. And I think comedy is, it's often occurred to me that comedy's almost unique in that respect. If you want to do solo stand-up, for obvious reasons it's a lot easier, because A, you can rehearse in your head, you can write stuff on the bus. A lot of stand-up is not ever written down, it's just in there. And also you can rearrange your running order as you go. As soon as there's more than one of you, you have to rehearse, which takes up more time and obviously adds a level of organisation. If you want to do sketch comedy, where there's like 3 or 4 of you, it becomes more complicated. There's a smaller number of venues you can play at, and you have to work out how you're going to mic yourselves up. If you need microphones, do you need 4 microphones, radio microphones? All these boring technical things come into play, and that, I think, is one of the reasons why university comedy groups tend to produce comedy actors. And Hugh and I used to find gigging, just the very fact there were 2 of us was like a visual treat for the audience, and it was really helpful, because we would do bills at Jongleurs or at the Comedy Store or wherever it was, where every act was a solo person standing behind a microphone, maybe with a guitar, probably not. And then at some point in the evening, the compere would put another microphone next to the first microphone, and the audience would think, oh wow, a visual spectacular, there's going to be 2 of them. And it was just that little bit different. One of the things with comedy is that the fastest way to get your stuff performed is to perform it yourself. And there are quite a lot of stand-ups who start out just wanting to perform their stuff. They're almost performing as a demo for their writing ability. And sometimes they discover they like performing and they carry on. Others often stop and become writers. But because one of the things that happens as you start doing it, particularly when you go to Edinburgh, is that you start meeting other people. So you'll find there are comics, particularly impressionists, for example, who actually don't write. They have a fantastic skill, but they're always on the lookout for writers. So at 2 o'clock in the morning in some bar in Edinburgh, you'll find yourself going, hey, why don't you write some jokes for me? And you know, teams form up in that way. There's a few people, stand-ups, who are quite precious about not wanting to sort of dilute their style, but there's a lot of other people who really enjoy the kind of cut and thrust of a writer's room, where, because it is fun. That's the thing about writing comedy, is it, in a way, you're hearing the jokes first. So if you sit in the writer's room for If I Got News or Mock the Week or any of those shows, there's quite a lot of laughs goes on. Some of them for the wrong reasons, but I found it very consistently interesting that a lot of the best jokes come very easily. You know, it's I have a feeling that may be true of a lot of things. You know, writing songs. So it's the ones that take half an hour that are really good. The ones that you really have to slave over, it's probably because it's not quite right. It is a proper quiz. I have to say that in advance. It's not a comedy quiz. You know, the questions are like a proper quiz, like a university challenge type quiz. But the atmosphere, hopefully, is more like a comedy quiz. And what we're trying to do is combine the both so that it feels like a sort of high-class pub quiz. We wanted to give it a different, slightly more accessible feel whilst keeping the questions at full strength, as it were, the students versus their teachers, which has a kind of inherent entertainment value to it because it's so monumentally unfair. But it means, I think, that the audience are usually rooting for the student team, and also it is not unknown for the students to win, and when they do, it's particularly galling for the professors who they're up against, because it is structured so there's one round particularly where the questions will work in such a way that you know, a middle-aged geology professor might end up with a question about the X Factor or something. So it's sort of, hopefully it's fun whilst at the same time sort of respecting the academic level that we're at. It's one of the other reasons why it got commissioned to start with, was because Radio 4 have this perennial problem of attracting younger listeners. That's been the case for as long as I've been involved with them. They really want to find stuff that will pull in younger listeners, and don't forget, for Radio 4 defines younger as like 35. So 20-year-old is like amazing for them, because let's face it, you know, Radio 4's listenership does generally skew older. So quite a lot of the students who I've met on this have said, you know, my parents listen to Radio 4. And I think it's an acquired habit. A lot of, when you meet people who are student age who listen to Radio 4, it's almost always because their parents, they grew up with the Archers on in the evening or whatever it is. But Radio 4, I think, really like the idea of actually going out to universities and a show that involves students, because it's nice to hear young voices on the radio. And it's worked very well for us. It's been, you know, it's generally a rather delightful thing to do.